Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Monday, March 7th, 2022, 9 o'clock strategic planning meeting. It is 9:02. We are just getting started. Let the record reflect that Commissioner Kearns and Commissioner Cuny are here. Commissioner French will be joining us in just a few moments, so he will be here just shortly. We'll see him join here soon. As well as our executive management team. And then I have Scott Chesney, who's joining us, and Jessica Pilgrim to talk about the 2022 Comprehensive Plan Amendment application briefing. So I will let the two of you go.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Thank you, Ron. You can go to the next slide right away. We're here before you in a slightly okay, that's an interesting slide. Let's try the next one. Yes, that's better. We're here before you to introduce for your ultimate consideration to initiate a series of 9 amendments that were applied for by various property owners this cycle. Differently than the past, we have gone and done some, I would call preview work with with a number of agencies, some cities, and notably using the Planning Commission, as you authorized a few weeks ago, to hear some early public comment about these opportunities and for them to issue a determination, or at least a recommendation rather, to you on moving these forward. So we've done that. As I said, there are 9 candidates this year. 7 of those are recommended by the Planning Commission for initiation. And we'll talk through all 9 of them, and we can talk about all of them as we go. Next slide, please. We're going to do this in also a little bit different way, because some of these are clustered geographically. Traditionally, we start just 1 through whatever and go through them. But because we've got really 2 clusters, one here on the West Plains and another on the northeast side in the Hastings Farwell corridor, we're looking at these as a group, and it's also to try to give the commissioners a sense of how they interact together, and particularly on the West Plains. As we've seen, 3 amendments from last year, there have been sort of perennial changes being requested out here. And we've got some ideas on how to handle that as we'll discuss as we go forward. Next slide, please. First amendment is, you can see I-90 cutting diagonally through the slide here, the airport on the left side, the UGA right in the middle, the lilac color being light industrial lands, the yellows, oranges being residential lands. This is a series of parcels that are being recommended from light industrial to mixed uses. It's quite a large parcel. Takes up some frontage, fills in these parcels with a potential residential mixed use capacity. Pretty straightforward in one sense. You can see on this slide some of the challenges with a project of this scope: road capacity, drainage, and transit. There is a transit center down at the 4 Lakes intersection, but no transit through the middle of the area. And as you've seen in the past, and we'll consider here as we go through, stormwater management in this area is a real challenge. So that's something we have to work through. We know the county and Chad and the Public Works team have some specific plans in mind, and they'll have to be really done concurrently as these projects move. Next slide. So this is a little more detailed aspect of that. You can see the parcels to either side. You can see the emerging business and industrial development on the north side of I-90 and the continued growth on the south side. Next slide. Here you can get more of the aerial context. You can see these parcels are predominantly undeveloped. The event center is off on the immediate west side of these parcels. There is some emerging residential to the east of this and some residentially platted lands. Next slide. This is the second of the West Plains developments, again, from light industrial to residential. You can also see similar opportunities here. This is adding it potentially to our housing stock. Again, taking some light industrial capacity out and replacing it with residential. It has some challenges as well, same as the issue, drainage. Next slide, please. A little more context, and what you can see here and what you'll see next to this is on the verge or on the edge of existing and planned residential development. What you can see to the immediate right of the subject parcel is a light industrial parcel, but that's the Snowden Elementary School. You can also see to the north of this parcel is a fully platted residential subdivision, but it exists in a light industrial capacity. Those are some interesting challenges that we want to talk about as we kind of summarize these three West Plains projects. Next slide, please. Here's the aerial. You can again see one small business project here, and then moving over toward the Caterpillar facility on the far edge of the slide, but now you can clearly see the school. You can see the residential growth to the north, and you can see a residential platting being done to the northeast. So these are lands that are clearly in transition. Next slide, please. This is our third West Plains project, again, light industrial to low density residential. Again, addresses the emerging housing issues, still has the same issues as the rest of the West Plains, drainage. And next slide, please. Moving in a little bit, that one. You can see the context. You can again see residential platting to the east of this, and to the southwest, you can see an orange polygon of MDR. That was one of last year's plan amendments. So again, there's residential emerging throughout this corridor. Next slide, please. Aerial context here. Again, you can see the platting pattern taking place immediately adjacent to it. Next slide, please. Okay, let me go back one slide, if you would, Ron, or go back two. Here's what we wanted to give you some context in these West Plains, these three West Plains issues. You can see, like last year, that MDR pattern, this one, in the middle of these light industrial lands, these residential applications are coming forward in a pretty consistent basis. That's good for a lot of reasons. What it's suggesting, though, is as this residential cluster starts to build on all three of these amendments, what it does is effectively it cuts off some of the light industrial lands to the east and to the south as being further and further away from I-90, away from the transportation infrastructure that supports light industry. And it's starting to put light industry lands between emerging residential areas. So one of the things that we would like to have the board consider is something that if you are agreeable, we want to potentially look at a self-initiated comp plan amendment that might transition some of these what I would call interstitial lands, or the ones that are between these emerging residential areas, into a bigger residential or mixed use conversion as part of this amendment cycle. That's not part of the resolution that is in front of you today. It's an idea that was floated at the Planning Commission. There was quite a lot of support for it. And with, it's in this sense, if there's some head nodding, what we will do is take that back and fully prepare that for future consideration at an early meeting, but it won't be in quite the same sequence as these 9 amendments. But we would have that before you within another month or so, having had a chance to talk to more specifics about our plan commission with that, and also gather some additional public input from our agencies and from neighbors in the area. We know there's challenges on the stormwater side for all of it. We also know that, as we noted before, Chad's team in Public Works is looking at some solutions that might be available in the same horizon as these lands developing. And then on a kind of tangential note, but Commissioner French is very aware of this. One of the challenges in our settlement agreement from the 2013-2016 planning cycle was the assertion that the county has far too much light industrial land in its UGA designations. And there have been requests for removal of thousands of those acres. Well, this is an opportunity to do just that without having to change the UGA boundaries. It would give us a chance to do an analysis of saying, are we better off with some residential lands in here than to continue the light industrial pattern? And there's two other things to that. One, on the middle amendment, the one next to the school, there's that already built subdivision to the north that's still sitting in a light industrial capacity. At the very least, there's sort of a right sizing effect of this, of making sure those landowners have a chance to have traditional residential zoning so that they have less challenges for homeowners insurance, for refinancing, for other things that someone would look at and say, well, you're a non-conforming use in this. We can't provide financing for you for whatever reason. So we think there's a good public policy on both aspects of somewhat fixing that, but also taking a look at expanding our capacity in areas that really are not likely to be feasible for light industrial into the future. And then
Scott, Commissioner French has his hand up. So
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I want to give a little bit more context to a statement that Scott made there. The assertion that the county has more light industrial land that it might need was something that came up in the negotiations with the plaintiffs, but it was also predicated upon the rate of growth that we had experienced prior to 2011, 2013 in the county in the West Plains, which was very slow. And then all of a sudden, we create the PDA, and now we've got the fastest growing light industrial area in the state. So I want to give context to that statement. It was made prior to what we're experiencing right now, and I don't know that it is as legitimate a statement as it was before. The other thing is that a significant part of that light industrial designation land is the airport itself. And obviously, we're not going to be developing the airport other than aeronautical uses, but it's not something that's going to be available for other light industrial uses that might occur. So, you not only have the land that lies under the current two runways, but you also have the land that is designated for the future second parallel runway. And all of that has been delineated on the airport's master plan. So one of the things that Scott and I have talked about is creating a government designation, zoning designation that would include all uses that are identified as government, whether it's parks, whether it's airport or other facilities that clearly are unique in their nature, but are government related. That will give us a truer picture of what we have in inventory for not only light industrial, but also for residential and general commercial and stuff. So I just wanted to give you some context about that. And then the other thing is that the conversation that we're having with the mayors on the West Plains and city council members is, that land that lies south of I-90 is probably becoming more and more appropriate for residential use. And land that lies north of I-90 is really general commercial or light industrial. And that seems to be the pattern that's developing more and more now as we get even some of the developers that have light industrial land that are saying on the south side, the probability of light industrial coming to my property is quite a ways off, but I can develop it as residential today. And so I think you're seeing some of that in the requests that are coming forward that Scott's discussing with you now. So I just want to give you a little bit of context about the statement that was made back in 2011 is not appropriate in 2022. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner French, Madam Chair. And we concur with that, especially the sentiment that the lands south of I-90 are changing in a way that is moving away from a business and particularly light industrial classification into this residential, which is why we were thinking of taking a broader look beyond that rather than simply waiting for each of these individual parcels to pop through one at a time. So that's the basic context for that. We can go on. Ron, if you would, please. Keep going. The next group of requested amendments is along essentially the Hastings-Farwell corridor. You can also see the Newport Highway on the south side of this, the south east corner, and also the pink area of mixed use that is the future mixed use Greenstone project on the former Kaiser lands, the intersections with the north Spokane corridor being both on the top of the slide and moving over to the right side of the slide. There are three in here. Next slide, please. The first, low density to higher density residential, again, on the corridor. You can also get a hint of the one right across the street being requested in the same way. One of the interesting elements to this is to the immediate east of this parcel, you can see on this slide, and let's go to the next slide, please. Should pop in a little bigger. If you notice carefully, there are no parcel lines around that forested parcel south of Farwell Road and north of Newport Highway. That's DOT right away. And one of the things we have found in conversing with STA and DOT is some emerging discussion that could be a potential future STA park and ride or station facility along that corridor, serving both the urban corridor of Hastings Farwell and the Newport highway corridor, with the emerging, with Costco there, the emerging other retail and mixed use projects. So this was the higher density residential makes a great deal of sense when you've got those transportation elements next to it. So next slide, please. You can see the zoning context for, again, all three of these projects. They're close together. You can also see in their immediate proximity in the environs several others that are in the orange or darker orange color in zoning. Those are the higher density residential designations already. So these are not isolated parcels. They are part of a clear emerging pattern of adding density along transportation corridors. Next slide, please. This is the second one. Now north of Hastings Farwell, two parcels, again, undeveloped for the most part, fitting into the pattern of the neighborhood with that slightly higher density development. Next slide, please. A little more closer, you can see the school site on the side and the opportunity to put in residential on the site itself. Next slide, please. Go ahead, please. Third one is a little smaller parcel. This was into a more medium density, north of Hastings and in that sort of triangle area. Again, nothing out of the ordinary. Fits as the other two do, the idea of combining density with future transit. One of the study idea or the added analysis we're talking about on the West Plains. In talking with STA and with your support last year, the award of the transit grant to the city, county, and STA to study transit in this North Division corridor area gives us a chance to use those grant funds to also augment the study of how the Hastings Farwell corridor and Newport Highway can fit into a transit system, which is, of course, very supportive of having higher density components nearby, in the workforce housing arena, where whether renters or owners would not necessarily have to have two automobiles or potentially even one automobile if they have adequate transit. Next slide, please. Zooming in. Next slide, please. Go ahead, Ron. The last of these are individual ones. The next one, go ahead, please, is in what are called LAMRDs, or local areas of more intense rural development in GMA speak. Our zoning code calls them rural activity centers. This is a request to add to that rural activity center on the east on the west side of the highway. The Rural Activity Center is on the east side of the highway. Go ahead, please. Again, you can see that slightly darker buff color is the zoning for the Rural Activity Center, and this would be a new parcel, somewhat disconnected from that. Now, before we get really any further on this, we accepted this in for study at the time when we thought that we would be in full compliance earlier this year, and that would allow us to reconsider these LAMRDs as essentially rural activity centers. We are not at that point, and by the settlement agreement, we are not allowed to go look and add to the areas of these rural activity centers. So because of that, the Planning Commission did not endorse this to go forward, and we would ask the same of the board. We are simply not legally able to move this one forward at this time. Next slide, please. You can see the land being proposed south of the church, west of the highway. Go ahead. The next one is also a really interesting opportunity. Go ahead, please. These are some lands in our heavy industrial area. What you can see is what's called the Hanson companies to the south of that parcel in red. Bonneville Power is to the immediate north. The Kaiser facilities are north of that, and now the Greenstone project will be north of that part. This is a proposal to convert some chunk of heavy industry into a mixed use, in this case, a regional commercial use on more than 45 acres. The challenge we have here, well, there's two. The opportunity is an investor wants to put new housing, new mixed uses, new regional commercial into an area of heavy industrial use that hasn't been used in some time. The opportunity, if that's the bird in the hand, the bird in the wish list, the bush, is that heavy industrial land is in a way these days a little bit like prime ag lands. Nobody is ever likely to be able to feasibly zone land heavy industrial in or near cities anytime in the future, probably not again in our lifetimes. And so having available land for heavy industry could be considered an asset, particularly in our current times, as we've seen the changes in the economy from COVID. Companies are beginning to do things as they call them reshoring as opposed to offshoring. They're trying to bring back things that were previously sent overseas. There's a consideration for whether or not this conversion right in the middle of heavy industrial, which would in fact would separate two nodes of heavy industrial, should be seen as maybe an opportunity to hold that in speculation and try to encourage the redevelopment taking place on the west side of this that's already adjacent to the city of Spokane and might be a better candidate for redevelopment because it's probably too far away to be a viable heavy industrial use in any case. So this is the challenge the Planning Commission found, and they chose at this point to not recommend this to go forward for initiation. We of course leave that in your hands, but that's the consideration that we would look for in during the analysis is bird in the hand versus bird in the bush. There's some request for development to go forward. Is it the right place and the right time to start taking heavy industrial land out of circulation?
Commissioner Kearns has a question.
Sorry, thank you.
Scott, I was just looking for clarification under the proposal in the upper left-hand corner. It says low density residential to regional commercial. It's heavy industrial.
Yes.
Do they want it changed to low density residential or do they want it changed to regional commercial?
No, Commissioner, my apologies. I've looked at these slides so many times. I didn't even see that anymore. It should be from heavy industrial to regional commercial. Regional commercial is what they're requesting.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Next slide, please. You can see it in a little more context. It is a single parcel. It requires transportation infrastructure, water, sewer, if it were to go forward. And you can see that there have been some changes to that designation on the west side of that parcel already, with some regional commercial, the high density residential and so on. Next slide, please. Here's the context. Generally wooded, smaller parcels to the west. We know that the site has been used as simply a homeless campground at some times. So there's some consideration of, by developing it, are we improving overall economics? When we initially met with the applicant on this, one of the things that we all suggested or talked about is, should the Northeast PDA play a role in looking at some of these lands in a more comprehensive manner for future uses? And we know that's been considered, but that's not necessarily a part of this comprehensive plan discussion. So next slide, please. Finally, our last one, next slide, is a fairly unique issue. To the immediate west is the city of Spokane, roughly the Hilliard Business Park area. To the immediate east is a city of Spokane water reservoir. That is Wellesley that comes along, and then the road out to Beacon Hill. As it was called, the Camel Farm is to the south, that has been now planned for residential development, high to medium density residential development. Also, there's been talk of a transit stop, a park and ride of some kind, or a small station going in to better link this to the system. These are 3 parcels that are currently light industrial. The center parcel is owned by the city of Spokane. Next slide, please. You can see the parcel lines here a little better in the context of the city industry to one side, light industrial to the top. This is kind of a remnant of that, with residential zoning already existing to the south and emerging residential development in that same area. Next slide, please. And on the context of this, you can see a small, almost like dirt road that cuts through that city of Spokane parcel. The city's perspective is that they're not really in favor of this, because that parcel serves as an emergency spillway if something were to happen to that reservoir that you see the white dot. They will not sell it. They will not want it incorporated into the project. But they would not object to the comp plan and zoning changes, as long as it's clear that nothing can ever happen there. We encourage the developer to meet with the city and see if they could come up with an agreement on whether it could be used as open space, or whether the developer could make some improvements on public property that would give an amenity factor. We don't know the results of that discussion yet, and this would depend on going forward, but it would provide 2 parcels of new higher density residential in an area that has some job creation opportunity. Next slide, please. That is the summary of our comp plan amendments for the year. There's as you see, a nice variety, and we put those in the context of that group on the West Plains that may have some utility, as Commissioner French noted. The lands on that south side undergoing a bigger change. Maybe we should look at that more directly now. And the Hastings Farwell corridor triplet in the transitioning corridor that could benefit from some transit planning with our colleagues at STA, and the others are kind of standalone amendments. So that is what we have before you for your consideration in a couple of weeks.
Thank you. And Commissioner French has raised his hand.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So on the parcels that want to go from residential, I think you said single family to multifamily, or light industrial to multifamily. If we were to change the zoning regs for the city of, or for the Spokane County, that would allow for a either smaller lots or higher density in some of these areas, would that address the concerns, or are the developers in these areas really looking to put in apartment buildings or some other kind of duplexes, fourplexes, some kind of structure like that? Or would smaller housing on smaller lots also fit what they want to do?
Commissioner, that's a particularly good question. At this stage, we don't know enough to answer that directly. The request, as you're all familiar with, is a land action request to move from a lower density to a higher density, but still in the residential capacities on Hastings Farwell for sure, and the others from that light industrial to residential. At this point, there's no sense of what a future project would look like. The board in 2020 changed the single family or low density residential designations to allow up to 8 units an acre and even 10 with some density bonuses. And these are being requested for medium and higher densities. So the presumption is the developers want to put in something that can't be met with that 8 or 10 units an acre capacity. I guess that's about the only definite thing we know about them at this time, with probably exception of that bigger one on the West Plains, the first one we showed you. That's almost 100 acres. And so their mixed use category, at least presumptively, would have some commercial, if not neighborhood commercial, and shops in there to serve a residential population that would be surrounding something of like a small village core.
So since the state can't figure out how to do condominium development regulations, it makes it difficult for particularly low income or communities of color to get into a home ownership situation when all we're doing for multifamily is apartment buildings. And so I would be very supportive of us taking a look at our residential zoning and allow for, either smaller lots, or I know that we allow for 0 lot lines, but maybe some other kinds of configurations that would allow for home ownership. Maybe it's not a 50 by 125 foot lot. Maybe it's a lot that's closer to 1,500 to 2,000 square feet. So I just put that out for your consideration. I know we've talked about the challenges that exist for low income to get into the housing market. And if we could do something that would lower the housing cost, lower the land cost, utility cost, maybe we can start working on bringing down the housing cost as well.
Commissioner, we would gladly add that to our work plan. In fact, the idea of expanding these from the privately initiated amendments into a county initiated amendment, particularly on the West Plains, would offer a chance to look at both residential zoning of some kind, but also can we either create a new kind of residential zoning for single family owned and occupied housing, or can we modify what we have? Something that, in terms of staying ahead of the game, we know the state legislature considered a bill for what's called the missing middle housing that would have required communities to allow up to 6 plexes in traditional single family designated lots, or as an option, you could move your overall densities to 30 units an acre. The bill died, but it will clearly be back in a future session. And if Spokane County, kind of wants to control its own destiny, taking a look at those development regulations in this cycle seems like a wise move.
Well, the bill died because cities in particular, but joined by counties and WASAC and AWC, said land use issues should be controlled at the local level. And so the legislators defaulted to the leadership at either the cities and the counties and stuff. And so since, in my mind, we won that argument in that we maintain control at the local level, I think it also is incumbent upon us to do something to address the issue. And so, while I applaud the legislature and their intent, they were the wrong body to take that action. And so, it seems to me that that's work that this body can do and put forward, and maybe the other cities will follow our lead.
We hear you loud and clear. Thank you, Commissioner. Madam
Thank
Chair,
you.
that's all I have from our side.
Very good. Any further questions for Mr. Chesney? Okay, so just so I'm clear, so this is a resolution. This is just going to be going, we're just allowing these to move forward to the Planning Commission.
You are,
Decide.
the Planning Commission had heard them in a preview capacity. They are now before you for formal initiation. You will have a resolution at your next meeting to receive them and set a time for that action, which we believe is now on the 22nd. In which case the board will formally initiate the amendments, which means you essentially send them back to us in building and planning for formal analysis, and then a presentation, public hearing back through the Planning Commission and ultimately to the Board of Commissioners later on in 2022.
Thank you. I just want to be clear on how that all worked. So
Yes.
we're just initiating this to go back to the planning, to go back to your department and then the Planning Commission.
Correct.
Thank you.
Well,
Any other?
and yeah, the other part of that, though, is that some of these should not go forward. And I think that's what Scott and the Planning Commission were suggesting, that, you know, there are some that should go forward. There are others that either one, need more work, or two, might be inappropriate request given where we want to go. So it's a matter of, I don't like to say it's a matter of picking winners and losers, but it clearly is a matter of, you know, who's going to stay in the race and who's not. So there's that part of it as well.
So that's clearly identified in the resolution. The resolution we're approving is allowing the ones that are going forward versus the ones that are not.
Madam Chair, that's correct. The Planning Commission made a specific recommendation for 7 of these to be considered by you for initiation. Their recommendation on 2 others was to not move them forward. The Lammard one is also because we are bound by our settlement agreement, and we just legally can't push that forward at this time. And the Kaiser area is the one that they kind of fell back on and said maybe it's premature, maybe a bigger study needs to be taken into consideration with the Northeast PDA, and maybe we shouldn't be dismissing our heavy industrial land quite so quickly. So they held back on endorsing that one as well for this, at least this cycle.
Thank you. And I guess just to clarify, that is stated in the resolution that we will be looking at.
Yes. Correct. Yes, that is correct.
Thank you. Okay. No, it doesn't look like there's any other questions or comments. So thank you very much. Appreciate the thorough presentation, Mr. Chesney. And I can see that resolution. Is that resolution on tomorrow's agenda or next week's agenda?
I believe it's on next week's agenda to receive them and set the date to act, which would be a week following.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Okay. Next on our agenda is Mr. Mike Burgess, to give a legislative update. Oh, there he is. I see him. So thank you, Mike.
Hello, Commissioners.
We're getting close to the end.
We are, mercifully, but yeah, session's supposed to end on Thursday. All indications I'm hearing is that will happen. We're at the point in session where just almost all floor action with a few committee hearings smattered in, where those are always budget committees, and you can kind of see what bills they're agreeing on to be building blocks for their budget, bills that have revenue implications. And some of the larger policy bills are still bouncing back and forth between the House and the Senate as they iron out any of those agreements. Just to update you on, I have 4 bills here, and then I'll talk about the police reform bills broadly that we talked about almost at the beginning of session, the first couple of weeks, just to give you an update on those. But these are kind of 4 that we've talked about quite a bit over the last 3 weeks. 1918 is that reducing emissions from outdoor power equipment. That bill was made in a sense permissive, turned into an incentive program. It has a hearing in Ways and Means tonight. But again, the way this is structured, I think this is going to be part of the budget agreement. We'll of course monitor it to make sure it stays in that form where it's permissive or in some ways optional or incentive. So it doesn't go back to its original form, but I'm pretty confident that's going to stay the case. 5042, that is the bill that some have referred to as vesting, the vesting legislation. It did pass the House last week, almost on party lines. So it should be going to the governor. We talked about some of the politics surrounding that issue last week, but that is, definitely was a priority bill for the environmental community. So that one's going to pass. I would anticipate, I'd be shocked if the governor didn't sign it. The next one, 5901, the Economic Development Tax Deferral Bill, has a hearing right now in the House Finance Committee. I would anticipate that bill to continue to move, get itself off the House floor in the next few days and go on to the governor. Then the last one, the DOT property bill, has passed both House or passed the Senate, of course, a few weeks ago, then passed the House recently. I'd have to go back and double check if it was amended. We did talk last week about 2 amendments that were offered. Neither of those amendments passed. So I think the bill is clean. And at that point, it would go to the governor. But if it did receive an amendment in the House, it would have been just technical. It was not something that would have changed the policy. So that bill will go to the governor's office for his signature. You have any questions about those or some of the others that I've dropped off the list? If I've dropped them off, it's that they've either died or have moved all the way through. Doesn't look like we see any there. So obviously you can come back if you do have any questions. On the police reform bills, there's 4 of them out there. 2 of them are actually already been signed by the governor. You'll remember the one, it was 1719 that dealt with the military equipment. That's the clarified the use that the police could use the shotguns for bean bags and some of those types of things. That bill was signed by the governor. And then the use of force for community care. And that was when you were using force to maybe detain somebody with some mental health issues or Involuntary Treatment Act and some of those types of things. Both of those bills were what I would categorize as pretty non-controversial. Broadly speaking, there were certainly some groups that would have had concerns about those. So I don't want to paint it as though everyone agreed to them. But for the most part, as they've moved through the legislature, those 2 were pretty well agreed to. And that's evidenced by the fact that they've already been to the governor. The other 2, 2037 is the definition of physical force and when that can be used. This one's much more controversial. It has passed, versions have passed both the House and the Senate. But this is one of those bills I talked about that the Senate and House need to come to a final agreement on because they were amended. The voting margins on that bill were pretty large. It's just interesting in that when the bill left the Senate, most of the no votes were from the majority party. So it's a little odd. Somebody like me notices something like that I don't know if it was a majority of the majority caucus. I'd have to do the math. But anyway, worth noting there that this bill's got a little bit of work to do. But everything I've heard is the anticipation is that it will continue. It will pass in some form. The last one, 5919, it deals with, it has components of those other bills I mentioned, but principally deals with the pursuit. And you'll remember when we were talking about these a month ago, Sheriff Knezevich had some real concerns about the inability to do pursuits. I'm kind of oversimplifying what he had said, but that bill is moving through. As far as I can tell, there's a desire to come to some sort of an agreement on that, but we'll have to wait and see. So that kind of covers the cachet of all the law enforcement bills. Do you have any questions about those? Okay. One bill too I did not put on the list that I wanted to mention, 5155, that was the bill that dealt with prejudgment interest. You might have seen some communications from WASAC on that. The bill did not pass. The House will watch that. This is the kind of thing that sometimes can pop up as though it's necessary to implement the budget. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But at this point, if I were a proponent of that bill, I would not be excited about its proposition for success. Lastly, two things, just the transportation package. We've gone through several iterations of what the funding is. You'll remember last week we had a long discussion, somewhat long, about the legislature switching from the, I guess I'd call it the out-of-state fuel tax, to looking at using the Public Works Trust Fund dollars to fill that void. Now it looks like the shift is going to be towards MOTCA funds. That's the Model Toxic Control Account or Act. Principally, it's a tax on hazardous materials, which ends up being fuel for the most part. And MOTCA funds cleanups and then funds some operations at the Department of Ecology. There's a pretty significant amount of dollars in that account or that have been flowing through as inflation happens and the price of fuel goes up and those types of things, because that's how the tax is figured. And so there's a pot of money there. There is a concern on the county side that counties do receive some of those MOTCA funds through different programs at the Department of Ecology. So the worry is that you're sweeping money from one account to fill another account, though it may benefit some counties. I think we've all agreed that this transportation revenue package does not have a huge amount of benefit to Eastern Washington, in particular in the Spokane region. I'm not making that argument now. I'm just saying, though, that you're taking a pot of money that would have gone to counties anyway and backfilling projects with that. So we're going to have to wait and see how that turns out. But that was the latest. It's interesting that Public Works Trust Fund issue was on the table and then was off the table by probably about Tuesday or Wednesday of last week. When I say off, not completely off, have heard that this MOTCA scenario and the Public Works Trust Fund scenario, there could be a combination of the two of them. So they're ironing those agreements out, but there is a lot of pressure to get the transportation revenue package passed. So I would anticipate something to break loose in the next few days in terms of a public announcement that an agreement has been reached. On the operating side, the House and Senate were about, I want to say $1.5 billion to $2 billion-ish, under $2 billion apart on their original proposals, with the House being on the higher end of that. But as word I've gotten is they've reconciled most of those issues and are close to an agreement. I haven't read anything in the papers on that yet. That's just the rumor mill of the lobbying world floating around out there. So, but again, when you have the revenue that's come in and two majority parties in agreement on most things, I'd be pretty surprised if they didn't come to an agreement on the operating budget here in the next 24, 48 hours. That's what I have for you. Just all updates now, nothing really new at this point in the session.
So Mike, just clarifying that when you're talking about on the transportation and the operating budget, that they're coming together, to make that deal, that's just the majority party from each of the different chambers, correct?
Correct. Yes, Commissioner, we'd have to wait and see. I don't think there was any, both the operating and the transportation budget have not had any sense of being bipartisan. Historically, the operating budget is never really a bipartisan document unless, the Senate's, say, under Republican control and the House is under Democrat control, or vice versa, when they're forced to come to some sort of bipartisan agreement. But the voting margins now are such that everything that has happened so far, it has not been bipartisan. And that transportation, though, is one that had been bipartisan in the past historically. This one has not been. That maybe that could change. But that's also been one of the criticisms of this from folks that have issues with it, that transportation is better served when it's bipartisan. Those are not my editorial comments, but I am relaying kind of the general feel for those folks that are involved in that issue closely.
Thank you.
For sure.
Any other comments or questions for Mike?
If anything comes up, commissioners, in the next 24, 48 hours, I will get in touch with you. But at this point, just kind of waiting to see how it all turns out. Probably would do a call next week, but I'll talk to Gina about that, or the week after, to kind of clean things up and wrap things up with the way it finished. And we'll go from there. Start thinking about 2023. How about that? So.
Right. And you do think they'll finish on time? You don't think they'll get extended?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything, Commissioner, to indicate that they're gonna have to come back or go special. I mean, you know, sometimes they end up going past midnight on Thursday, but that's not necessarily a special session, so.
Yeah, I hadn't been hearing anything else, but I just checking.
I
So-
have one vote that says, please don't go longer, so.
Okay, any other questions or comments for Mike? Seeing none. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate all the work that you've been doing.
Thanks,
for us.
commissioners. I'll see you again soon. Bye.
Okay. So we are ahead of schedule. But I see that Ben Bradabo and Rob Lindsay have joined us. So thank you very much. So we will go ahead and move on to a briefing on the status of the discharge permit and new, let's see, a new TMDL for, like, Rob, I'm gonna let you say what all that means. So.
Okay. Good morning. Good morning, commissioners, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Commissioner Cuney, you touched on a point that I was going to address right away, and that is I'm going to do my very best to avoid confusing acronyms today. This is a very complicated topic on two levels, and so I'm going to do my very best to fly low and keep it understandable. Today I'm joined with Lori Terry, who's our attorney with Foster Pepper. She's been representing the county on water quality issues for many, many years, longer than Ben and I have been around, actually. So we're very lucky to have her along with us today to keep me honest and to make sure that we're getting it right. And then, of course, Ben Bradabo is along with me today as well. And Ben is our water reclamation engineer and is very strong on the operations of the plant and on our permit as well. So again, I'm going to address two things today. The first is the ongoing process of the renewal of our discharge permit from our state-of-the-art facility. That's a regular process that happens every 5 years, and we're in the middle of doing that right now. And it's not just the county, it's also the city of Spokane, the city, Liberty Lake Sewer and Water, Inland Empire Paper, and Kaiser. So we're all going through the process right now. Then the second part of my presentation is going to be to describe to you a change in direction in the implementation or the way that the Clean Water Act is being applied to the Spokane River watershed, particularly with respect to management of toxic chemicals coming out of our facilities and into the Spokane River. And before I get going on that, I just want to remind you that we in the Spokane River watershed are a full step ahead of not only the state of Washington, but many other communities throughout the nation, in that we have already addressed the nutrient challenge that so many other communities are dealing with. And I'll point to Puget Sound as one right now, where that's a major issue as a water quality concern. And so wastewater treatment plants are only now coming around to addressing nutrients in the watersheds. This is something that we did in Spokane a decade ago. And so we are now on the leading edge and addressing toxic chemicals. And so we're getting a lot of attention locally from the environmental community, because we're at a point now where we're able to address this. And that's the way the Clean Water Act works. It goes from one chemical to the next. You know, when you address one problem, the next one's right on its heels. So that's where we are. But that said, I'm going to back up and just give you a background on just where we are on the discharge permits. Our facility, our county's facility, received our first permit in 2011, and it's a 5-year process to renew these permits. And when that was initially done in 2011, we were primarily dealing with the nutrient pollution and with addressing dissolved oxygen. And And we've done that. We have met the most stringent, some of the most stringent nutrient discharge criteria in the nation. And at the same time, the city of Spokane did this. Scott Simmons, our CEO, was Public Works Director at the city at that time when the city invested close to $1/3 billion to upgrade their facility for dissolved oxygen as well. But now we're at a point where we're renewing these permits, and Ecology has been doing a stepped process where earlier this year they put the city of Spokane and Kaiser's permit in draft out on the street for public comments. Those comments were received last week, and they were very, very pointed. There are a lot of comments from both the environmental community and from the city and other dischargers that would give me pause to say that we think that it's possible that there may be legal repercussions. It's possible that there will be appeals of this permit. Or put another way, there was plenty for both sides, for both the environmental community and for the dischargers, to be concerned about, to the extent that there may be some appeals for that. And we at the county have not received our official permit yet. We received a draft permit where we were able to look at, basically it's kind of a courtesy review, if you will, to look for topographical errors, factual errors, things like that. And so we've responded to that. And we've also pointed out some other technical issues, but our permit has not officially gone out on the street for public comment. We're expecting to see that within the next couple weeks. And then we'll have a month to comment, as will the rest of the community. And so as soon as that comes out, we'll be advising you again on just what's in there and what is of concern. But suffice to say, with the permits that have gone out for the city of Spokane and the comments that have come back, we have a pretty good idea what's coming. And so it's very possible that there may be some feedback from either the city or the environmental community that is going to create some sort of legal delay here or some conflict. And so we'll keep you advised on that. Lori, is there anything that you'd like to add to that with respect to at least what you've seen on the other permits and any potential?
The only thing I'd add, Rob, I think that was an excellent summary. The only thing that I would add is that this is sort of an iterative process, if you will. And it's important as a regulated entity to keep your eye on the things that really matter and to comment every opportunity you get. And that's what we've done. While we would not have to make all of our comments now, I've learned over the years, when you get that early review draft, which is an entity review draft, it's really a good idea to start making your case with not just the regulatory agency, the Department of Ecology, but also in case you end up in an appeals setting, it creates a much better platform to tell your story if you have been trying to make your points early. The only other thing I would add is that all of the dischargers are not situated identically the same. Because there's industrial dischargers, there's municipal dischargers, and there's differences among those as well. The reason why Rob previewed for you the other discharger permits is just so we were giving you an early briefing in case it turned out that those permits were appealed primarily by third parties because of the timing implications for us. If those appeals are filed before ours and there are issues that could impact us, we might need to intervene in those appeals to be able to have a way of putting our case on and not getting left behind. It's not an ideal scenario. It's not one that I hope we would have to do, but I wouldn't feel that we gave you full opportunity to understand that was a possibility if we didn't brief you now. So that's the only thing I'd add.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll open it up to any questions at this point with respect to, to our permit or the process or what the steps forward would be.
So do either of my other commissioners, Commissioner French?
Yeah, so either Rob or Lori, what is the status of the conversation around PCBs and our responsibilities to either control them, remove them, monitor them, whatever?
Thank you.
What's the status there?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. That is the second part of my presentation today is the status of PCBs and how that resonates with the Clean Water Act and this community.
So Rob, maybe before you get to that then, since you're going to talk about that. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out, you said 2011 was when the permits were first issued, and then you said that it's on a 5-year renewal. So I guess I'm trying to figure out where we are in that process, because I know sometimes with the Department of Ecology, those renewals get delayed. And so I'm just trying to figure out which 5-year section are we going after?
Yes, indeed. And thank you for noticing that. Yeah, the permits were they were issued in 2011, and then in 2015 or 2016, the Department of Ecology initiated a process to renew those permits, but they could see that there was resonating with PCBs. There is great interest in the community, particularly in the environmental community, to have numeric limits put into our permits for PCBs, and that's something. And at the time, the cleanup level, and this is where the story gets complicated because of the politics of the Clean Water Act, but the numeric criteria for PCBs we couldn't meet, and Ecology then encouraged us and other dischargers in the community to prepare variance applications. And so we did that and that's what Ecology was seeing as the path forward, was instead of reissuing permits, they were going to issue variances, which was not well received by the community at all. And so Ecology then decided to then just put those variances on hold and just simply administratively extend the permits, which is something that is relatively common. Ecology has done this with other treatment facilities, so they don't always update their permits every 5 years. They try to, but so we are still working under the permit conditions from our 2011 permit. And excuse me for a moment, I lost you guys. So
okay,
that said, we are still under the terms of our 2011 permit, but Ecology is now wanting to move forward and issue new permits this year, and include numeric criteria for PCBs, which is one of the more, I think, controversial aspects of the permits as it relates to our perspective from permittees.
so then with that, Commissioner Kearns, I'll finish my question, then I'll come to you next. So with that then, as you're speaking to, since we're still under the 2011 permits for all of the different entities that you spoke to or stated, I guess I'm just trying to figure out, so the concern is that maybe ours gets approved before the others, but then there could be issues with the others?
Right. Actually, we'll back up. We have the opportunity or the benefit of this point, at this point, of watching our municipal partners go through the process. And municipal partners being the city of Spokane. And so, you know, we've seen the comments that the city of Spokane has put out there. Their conditions are a little different than ours, but still at the root of this is numeric criteria for toxics. And we have been making the case for years that we don't have the technology to treat toxics to the very low levels that we're finding are or that the state is telling us are protective of the river. And so we have sought to conduct a more voluntary process using the task force and volunteering to do community activities, including the task force to identify sources of PCBs and engage in voluntary activities to reduce those sources. And that's what I was going to talk to you about next, is because that process is starting to unravel because of positions that the EPA is taking now. So our concern at this point is just to see what the city of Spokane's, what the reaction is to the city of Spokane's permit. And the city of Spokane may be appealing it because they may be seeing things in the permit that they just can't meet, or would create too much of a burden on the community, either financial or otherwise. And so they may choose to appeal it. We don't know, but we're waiting to see. And I think what Lori, was trying to communicate earlier is we're waiting to see what direction they may go, because it may turn out that the city of Spokane will take a position that we would agree with, and we may find that it's legally advantageous for the county to intervene on their behalf.
Okay, thank you.
And the only thing I'd add with that, Rob, just one little caveat is there is also a possibility of third parties to appeal an NPDES permit of any party. And that would mean Sierra Club could appeal, or a tribe could appeal. Really, anyone with standing can appeal, but they have to do so within 30 days of the date that the permit is issued in final form. So that's where the timing comes in, is that there will be appeal. If there are appeals filed, they will be filed before the county's permit is issued in final, right? And so what we wanted to preview is, depending on what issues are raised, really primarily by third-party appeals to the city's permit, we may feel that those issues are issues that will implicate the county's permit as well. And then we would have to think carefully whether we would need to intervene to preserve our ability to litigate those issues in a timely fashion, so that we wouldn't get stuck with a decision out of the Pollution Control Hearings Board that would then be applied to our permit, because that's the risk. That would be the risk.
Okay,
I
thank
hope
you.
that I should have been more clear on that before.
Yeah, so we're not going to be probably the first one to the table on this. So we're going to be watching what everyone else is doing. Very good.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, the city of Spokane and Kaiser are at the table right now. Actually, their comments have been received. The permit for Inland Empire Paper went public at the end of last week. So that permit is currently out for public comment. And we're anticipating that our permit will go out on the street in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. So Commissioner Kearns, I know you had a question.
Yeah, so when we discussed this about 5 years ago, when I was first became a commissioner, I know some of the conversation also centered around at the time that the technology didn't even exist to measure the low levels that we were required to hit. Has that technology advanced to where even if we do hit this level, can it even be measured to know if we've hit it? Because 5 years ago, a lot of the conversation centered around that technology didn't exist yet. Does it?
Yeah.
Does it today?
Nope, we still have the same laboratory methods, Commissioner. I would say the laboratories would tell you that they're probably getting a little bit better at it, but still, to get down to the very, very low levels that, the compliance levels now, single digit part per quadrillion, the accuracy of the laboratory methods at those very low levels really goes out the window. And so, no, we do not have laboratory methods that can reliably predict or document these very, very low levels. They can show us that we get down very low, but there's just a lot of background noise with the analytical procedures. These instruments, these analytical tools, they have to be calibrated. And in order to calibrate an instrument, you need to be able to actually have a zero component and then a known component. And so when you make a reference curve, and what we're learning is there's no such thing as zero. Again, I feel like I'm getting into technical speak here. I'll just say that there is no analytical method that reliably gets us down that low. And plus, that method is not approved as a compliance method for these sorts of permits. So what Ecology has done is they've put a number in our permit that I think we can meet most of the time. But then the test method that they're having us use doesn't even come close to getting down to that low of a level. So we'll be taking tests that the test method is going to show a non-detect. It's going to say, oh, there's no PCBs in it, because the method is not sensitive enough to get as low as we are. And so that is something that the environmental community is very offended by, that process. And that's one of the comments that's coming through very clearly. Is they're saying, well, you're setting a low limit, but you're not using a testing method that really tells us whether we're getting there or not. So they're asking us to use this more sensitive method. But we've been resistant to that in the past because it's just, when you get down to the really low levels, it's not that accurate.
Okay, thank you.
So the next point I want to touch on is on PCBs, and this is getting back to Commissioner French's question about where are we with PCBs. And I'm going to back up again back to 2011, because when Spokane County applied for and received the permit for this facility back in 2011, since we were a new plant, we had to start from scratch, and we had to build the very best plant possible and meet the most stringent water quality criteria out there. We weren't given a compliance schedule or time to get there. So we built the best darn plant in the Western United States 10 years ago, and it is still achieving that. We are doing very well on nutrients. But along the way, the environmental community was saying, hey, wait a minute, the river's listed for PCBs. That plant can't be permitted because it will be discharging PCBs. And Ecology, well, Bruce Rawls, our former utilities director, and Lori, as well as the city of Spokane and Kaiser and others, developed an alternative method to dealing with PCBs. And they did this in coordination with Rick Eichstad, who was with the Riverkeeper at the time, and it was the task force, and it was an alternative process to dealing with PCBs in the river. And it was in response to a lawsuit that the EPA that the Sierra Club brought against the EPA for giving us a permit in the first place. So what I'm saying is for the last 10 years, we've been participating voluntarily in a task force process where we've been working with IEP, Kaiser, the city, Liberty Lake, some environmental organizations, other organizations, to identify sources of PCBs in the Spokane River and to identify strategies to reduce those PCBs. And we've been doing that for 10 years, and we've been staying in regular contact with the federal courts. They've been keeping track of what we're doing. We went out and got a lot of money from the state, from the legislature. We've been spending that money on identifying sources of PCBs in the Spokane River, and it's been a successful process. Again, voluntary. We've been, yours truly, me, I've been the president of the 501c3 that oversees the task force. City of Spokane's Jeff Donovan has been the treasurer. He's been doing a lot of the administrative work financially. So we have been doing in-kind work to keep this task force alive. Again, as a way to keep from doing the more standard total maximum daily load process, which is the typical way of doing Clean Water Act implementation. I'll remind you that if we did that in the city of Spokane and watershed, and the reason why we wanted the task force is because if we do it, this TMDL, I apologize for the acronym, but that's the process of identifying how much pollutant can a river take. The river can't take any more PCBs. So if we do this traditional process, all of us dischargers are going to be told you get a 0, okay? And that's why we were talking about doing variances, okay? Because we can't do 0, we can't get to 0. And I'll remind you, we have PCBs coming out of our neighborhoods at levels that are as great as coming out of our commercial areas, okay? So PCBs are everywhere. So this isn't something that we can just flip a switch on. So anyway, we've been doing this voluntarily for 10 years. In response to an unrelated lawsuit between the Sierra Club and the EPA on the Columbia River, the EPA has unilaterally decided to do the TMDL in Spokane. They didn't talk to anybody else. They just decided, you know what, we have exposure. I'm speaking on behalf of their attorneys, so I'm shooting from the hip, but they decided that, you know what, we're going to do a TMDL and they're going to get it done by the end of 2024. So this really changes things because this voluntary process is over, or changing. And we at Spokane County, and I've already made it public that, we recognize now that this is a different process. We're not going down the voluntary path anymore of doing these activities to keep from getting a number in our permit. The EPA is going to do this TMDL. Ecology is putting numbers in our permits. And so we're kind of pushing back on this task force process saying, hey, this isn't voluntary anymore. We believe in doing community processes. This is a community problem. And we can, we're more than happy to participate in a community process. And we believe that using state funds and money from a very, very lucrative settlement agreement with Monsanto, $60 million to the state, can fund work to identify and better understand this unique and complicated environmental problem. But doing it voluntarily is not the way we want to continue to do it. And so we've been very clear with that with Ecology, and their current permits to us have us doing the task force, but we're pushing back and saying, we'll show up at the community table, but just don't ask us to voluntarily support the process and lead it and do all of that. So we're in a transition right now, and so now is a good time for us to be telling you about it. And as more information comes out, and as this task force begins to morph, we'll be keeping you informed and make sure that we understand your interests and sensitivities in representing Spokane County on this. But things are definitely changing. So,
It's like, I don't know what to say.
well, I'm sorry if I've overwhelmed you. There's a lot to that, but I guess suffice to say, the voluntary process is ending, and it's becoming compulsory. And the agency is definitely listening to the environmental community and is incorporating their interests on this. And it could be setting us up for an appeal, and potentially an appeal could just mean an extension, and this will just go on. So
I see that Scott has raised his hand. So Scott Simmons, I'll let you ask your question or comment.
More of just a comment in support of what Rob and Lori have been talking about. The commissioners know this, but it's good for everyone else who's listening on the call. When we talk about Spokane County needing to meet these, this is really our community. Spokane County is merely a surrogate of our community. So we manage wastewater treatment. We treat wastewater that we receive on behalf of our community. It's all reflected in the rates that the community pays for their wastewater services. And just to highlight a few things that Rob said, PCBs are ubiquitous. They're present everywhere. We as Spokane County, our plant, we don't manufacture PCBs. They've been outlawed for quite some time, but they exist everywhere. They exist in consumer products. They exist in the soils and everywhere today. So what we've done on behalf of our community has greatly improved and greatly reduced and pulled out PCBs from ever making it to the river. But the notion of trying to get to a functional zero is there is no technology today that would allow for that. There is no testing method that would even be able to support that. And yet, if there were continued investments or desire to drive that down, it's a very expensive proposition to our community who has to pay for ultimately a functional zero in this. We all want PCBs to be eliminated. We want them. We know they're toxic to the environment. We know they're toxic to people, and we want them gone, but we don't create them. We don't manufacture them. We merely are receiving them from where they're existing and moving elsewhere. So it's one thing. It's something that the team is really focused on, trying to create that balance in terms of what we can achieve, what can we afford for the community, and trying to also be thoughtful about a clean river. But there's a lot of other things that can and should be done in terms of non-point source control and trying to eliminate them out of consumer products and recyclable material and other things that they just exist today. So just a good reminder to others as this topic continues to be discussed, and we move towards a TMDL process, which will be very challenging for the community and for the plant.
Thank you, Scott.
Are there any other comments or questions for Rob or Lori or Ben? Seeing none, thank you, Rob, and thank you, Lori, for joining us today, and Ben. I'm sure that there's going to be lots more discussions as we move forward on this. So appreciate the information today, and I'm sure you'll be back to inform us as we move along the process.
Yeah, for sure. We'll be back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, 10:26, and we are going to be joined by, I think, Tim Atchison from, I think, Detention Services.
Yes, this is Tim.
Hi, Tim. Thank you.
Yeah, I am the program sergeant with Detention Services, and part of my duties is to supervise the Detention Services work crew.
Thank you. I know it's been challenging for you during COVID, so I appreciate you coming and giving us an update.
Not a problem. I'll start with the contracts. We are looking at a renewal with the City of the Valley. They've been fairly good partners with us and would actually like more of our services if possible, but with our staffing shortage, it's going to be a while before we can meet that request. We're in a renewal with the middle of the City of Spokane. Those should be coming through here in the next couple of weeks. We have, of course, like everybody else, staffing issues. Our original work crew staff was 7 officers. We are now down to 3. As a consequence, some of the contracts and some of the obligations that we have, we're not going to be able to meet this particular year. One of those is the upkeep of the fairgrounds, and then the other one is the transfer stations. I've been trying to ask for another body so we could at least give some level of service to the fairgrounds and the transfer stations over the summer months to do some of the groundskeeping. But we keep losing bodies, and so it's just not feasible at this point in time to get me the body that I need to do that. We have several special events coming up. First of all, here this month is the Pacific Northwest Qualifier, the volleyball tournament. That'll be a 4-day setup and tear down for us. We have Bloomsday coming up at the beginning of May. We will be at the Lilac Parade May 21st. Hoop Fest is coming up at the end of June. That's a big one for us. We usually spend a month helping them out with their warehouse and then setting up and tear down of the hoops for that event. And then I did commit to the fair again this year. I talked to Erin and told her that at least at the fair, I would be able to give her the same level of service that we did last year. But that's looking out to September. Are there any questions?
No, when you're talking about bodies, so it's staffing from supervision from the detention services side that we're still down. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. I guess that's another discussion for our jail director, but yeah, just appreciate all you're doing, because I know it's been a tough time for you guys with not being able to go out as much with COVID, and then with I'm now hearing you talk about the upcoming events. There's a lot that haven't happened for 2 years, so it's going to be great to see those things happen, and appreciate all that you are doing to make it happen and affordable for the community.
Yeah, the special events are, they're a big deal, and so we try to give the best level of service that we can. We stretch ourselves thin when we go from 7 officers to 3, but we're still going to give them the best service that we possibly can, and hopefully they're pleased with it.
Thank you. And so that's so I think it's the agreement that's going to be on this agenda, I guess, this week for the City of Spokane Valley.
Yes.
Okay. And then we'll see the other ones kind of come through, so you won't have to brief us on those. So I appreciate that. One comment I have on the City of Spokane Valley, you were saying, so they want more service than what we can do. Is that correct?
Every time that I talk to Shane Arlt, the maintenance manager for the city, he has requested 2 crews. At this point, I can only give him 1, but they would love to get another crew from us, and they can keep us busy.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I'm not seeing any, so thank you very much. I appreciate your time and giving us the briefing.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you for what you do.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, next on our agenda is Jeff McMorris to discuss ARP planning update.
Thank you, Commissioner Cooney. So we have put together a draft resolution for your guys' consideration as a board. The beginning whereases cover some of your overall thoughts, as well as goes through some of the dates of previous resolutions. That was the process of receiving these dollars. We have received the first half, which is about 50 million. We're expecting the second half to arrive May at the earliest. They said it would be at least 12 months after the first half. This resolution calls for 43 $330,400 in appropriation. However, only about 32 million of that is actually going into categories. First, I want to bring your attention to lowercase e in the middle of page 3 up on your screen, the revenue replacement portion. You guys actually aren't allocating that at this point. We did the formula, and that is the 2020 lost revenue calculation. We'll go through this exercise 3 more times over the next 3 years. So you will be getting, we expect within the next month or 2, we'll have the 2021 number. At this point, you are just moving that 9.38 million from the ARP account to the general fund account. We will have to report on how it's spent. There'll be decisions around that as we go. But at this point, you're not actually appropriating that to anything. We're just switching it from bank accounts as the guidelines suggest we should do. And then the second one I was going to draw your attention to before we go to the top, you see the 500,000 under letter C for effective service delivery. And then down at the bottom under letter F, you'll see the 1.5 million. These used to be together, but as of last Monday, they changed up the categories and subcategories, which moved them into these different expenditure category sections. But that 2 million is what we talked about a few weeks ago. That will cover internal staffing cost for grants, for monitoring, for the legal analysis. And then it also will be if we do an outside consulting firm to help, like the city did with Moss Adams, and if we need to do any IT upgrades to monitor these programs. So that's the 11.4 million of this isn't really going to the community. It's the overhead to run the grant and the revenue replacement. I also want to mention the $2 million of admin and service delivery. We're expecting that to cover the full 5 years. So we might have to do a tweak of an adjustment in a few years, but we do expect that to be the full allotment. So Ron, if you can go back up to the top, we'll just talk through the categories in order. So small a there under public health, there's 300,000 to medical expenses, 2.4 million to other public health services. And these would be dollars that organizations can apply to mostly for COVID related activities. The new regulations that came out last Monday, the 28th, did open up a little bit when it comes around capital, but the rules and guidelines are still very heavily tilted towards operations. So that's the public health category. We are using just the exact titles as the rules and guidelines do. Category B, negative economic impact. So there's $4.5 million directed towards affordable housing. You guys had conversations around doing some down payment assistance, some youth assistance. So that's that category. 5 million directed to educational disparities. We know there was a lot of challenges through COVID. Some schools were in session, some were not, some were online, some were not. So again, these will be put out for RFPs that organizations can apply to. And then we have 750,000, which is at the top of the next page, for nonprofit organizations. And you'll see the category actually has that parenthetical impacted or disproportionately impacted. You'll see in the RFPs when they come before you, those two terms are defined in the rules and regulations. And a lot of the categories, actually I believe all of the categories under public health and negative economic impacts require the applicants to show how their program, their service will help and make things better for people in those defined categories. So we'll talk about those more when the RFPs come your direction, but we do need organizations that are looking at applying for these funds need to educate themselves on those areas. The next category, I'll skip the 500,000 I already spoke to. Under infrastructure, just by way of reminder, infrastructure is defined in the rules as water, sewer, and broadband. So these are the different categories. You'll see 5.5 million towards stormwater, 2 million towards clean water, water conservation, that'd be more environmentally driven, 4 million drinking water, transmission, distribution, 500,000 drinking water storage, and 2 million water and sewer other. And a lot of this, infrastructure plays a big role in housing and economic development. Even if you're doing an infill housing project, you might take a current sewer pipeline over capacity. So when it comes to the big subjects, we've heard a lot of talk around both on the commercial side, economic development and jobs, on the housing side, getting more inventory. This is infrastructure. A lot of these categories are infrastructure that be needed towards that goal. The 5 million broadband, IIJA stands for the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That's the 1.2 trillion federally passed bill by Congress last fall. On the street, I usually hear referred to as just the infrastructure bill. There are a lot of funds coming through the federal government agencies or being passed through the state. At the state, you have the broadband office, which has been under the Department of Commerce. USDA Rural Development has a lot of broadband money coming through. So we will be looking at grant opportunities. Most of these grant opportunities ask for a 10% local match. While ARP funds in general cannot be used for a federal match, this is an exception to that rule. You see the category expressly says IIJA match. So with this $5 million, we're hoping to leverage another 50 million in broadband dollars, ARP money either coming through the state or through a federal agency. And on that same front, economic development, HUD, HHS, all of these federal agencies have ARP funds and grants that we're going to be looking at. We're excited to have Arian starting with us today. As you guys are aware, she'll be a huge help on getting our applications out to try to bring additional resources to the community. So with all of these categories in place, that leaves 58,216,983. You see in the normal number 3 in ARP funds yet to be appropriated. But I do want to just, by way of closing remarks before I take questions, remind the 9.38 million of revenue replacement is not being dedicated toward anything at this point. It's just being moved accounts according to the rules, and that will have to come back before the board. Any questions or comments before I kind of talk about next steps?
So Jeff, one question I have is on interest that we've received on those funds. What happens to that interest?
The interest stays with the county, which is unusual for a federal grant. Usually the interest goes back to the US Treasury. And at this point, it gets rolled into the general fund. So it'd be similar to revenue replacement, but my understanding at this point, it actually has less reporting requirements than revenue replacement. So think of it as general fund money, and we do get to keep it.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for Jeff? We will let you continue.
So this is queued. It's been on the agenda for action tomorrow on the consent. If action happens tomorrow, next steps would be starting to put out RFPs for all the categories that require RFPs. Of course, the 2 million for admin and internal, the revenue replacement, we won't be doing that yet. Talking with Arian this morning, we believe we can have first RFPs for the board to look at in a couple weeks. So probably the 21st, 22nd, we could get you guys first view on that, and then take your comments and possibly do some tweaks. Our goal would be the first week of April, the 4th and 5th would be that Monday, Tuesday, to actually have the RFPs posted on the website where anybody in the community can look and apply for these funds. During that time, we'll also need to have some conversations with the board around the application process. So we'll be bringing some thoughts and ideas around that to the board for approval. And at the same time, we have to put in place the RFP Selection Committee. Of course, legal will be the first hurdle. When people apply, we'll get legal analysis to make sure they've met the criteria to be considered. And then there'll be the committee, the selection committee, that would do some scoring and then bring it to the board for final consideration. So no money goes out the door until the board approves the projects at the end of this section. And then my thought would be probably April, May. Maybe in April, we'd start looking at a second round of ARP appropriations. I don't think it makes sense to probably bring them to a vote until the second pot of money has arrived. You could signal what you want to do before that other money arrives. We just have to wait on the RFPs until the money's in the bank. So that's kind of thought process moving forward. This resolution is based on I think we had 3 meetings in a row in February where we talked through some different categories and thoughts. And, and I've had some individual conversations with each of you. Also forgot, I need to hit on the community engagement aspect, which is required. We had the Council of Governments meeting in early January with elected officials, business and nonprofit leaders from around the county. Early February, I was down in Fairfield with Commissioner Cooney, where she pulled together the small cities down there as well as rural residents. We had a conversation. I was with Commissioner French very recently out in Medical Lake, having conversations around the West Plains. We'll be back out there on Wednesday for a community conversation that's both for the city of Medical Lake, but also presenting what the county's doing. Had numerous conversations with people. All 3 of you have sent my way for different thought processes. So we've also done a lot of community input. We've had over 1,500 responses to the survey that was put up in October, almost November. We've also put up the informal project request link on the website. So people can go to the survey and talk broad strokes, whether they think this should be public health or economic development or something else, or if they have a specific project they want to submit for your consideration, we're receiving those. And then all the RFPs, this resolution, when it's finalized and passed, everything related to ARP will be posted on the county's ARP website for the public to see and consider.
Thank you. I see Commissioner French has a question.
Yeah, Jeff, with regard to the timing you talked about in terms of another round, I know that in my initial summary of priorities for myself, water on the West Plains was one of those elements. And, the city of Airway Heights has got some grant money and just last week received some additional grant money, I think, from the state for their well project. What they lack is a clear path forward with regard to water rights. But then, we also have Medical Lake that has the opportunity to get another source of water and stuff. So if those opportunities should materialize in the next 60 to 90 days, there's nothing to stop us from coming back to address that, is there?
Not at all. Anytime the board wants to address anything, we can bring it up. And all future appropriations, my understanding from legal, will just be an amendment to this document that's before you. So if you needed to add whatever dollar amount to whatever category or a new category, we would essentially amend this document with the category and the dollar amount. So we don't have to do like the city did, where they did a first round and a second round. We can do single line item amendments along the way if need be, or we can do just another large, that's up to the will of the board.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay.
So if everybody is good with this, then I did make one change from Gina's. I noticed my my numbers were off on the after the now therefore. The one that went out Friday just had the alphabet twice instead of numbers first in the alphabet when it came to formatting. So the only change, which is on the hard copy I passed out to each of you this morning, is just the numbering. There's no substantive changes. So I'll have Gina change that out for the consent agenda tomorrow. But hearing no other comments, I believe this will be before you tomorrow for a vote.
Great, thank you. I think for me, Jeff, I just want to make sure that I understand if you can document what the process is going to be as we start to put out the RFPs and all of that. So that way we can be clear to us and to the community what that's going to look like.
So that first step would be 2 weeks from today, bringing you back your first look at it and getting your sense if we are going the direction and meeting what your guys' vision is. And then once we get that feedback, you'll be in the loop all the way, as will the public.
Thank you. Okay. Great job. You worked hard on this, I know. So thank you very much. Okay, so next on our agenda, it looks like we have 3 different executive sessions. Is that correct, Scott?
That's correct, Commissioner.
Will any of them require action at the end?
Mark, can you weigh in on the one you had? Is that going to have action on it?
No, it won't have any action. I'll have action next week if you want to take it.
Okay, and the other 2 do not, Commissioner.
Okay, so do we want to just do any miscellaneous items before we go into executive session?
Sure.
Just seeing it's 10:50, so I do know, so we have a Shrills meeting coming up on March 18th, that the agenda goes out by the end of this week, I believe, for it. Have the other commissioners seen that agenda? No.
That's 2 head nods. No,
I
ask.
don't think it's been sent to me. I don't remember seeing that in my email. I mean, I could have missed it, but
Okay,
I don't remember seeing that.
so we will try to.
He probably sent it to you because you're chair and the chair has to chair the Skrills meetings. So yeah,
Yes,
I don't think it's been sent to me.
I will make sure it gets out to you today, so that way we can add it to the 2 o'clock, after the 2 o'clock tomorrow. Because based on the resolution that the 2 of you approved at the beginning of the year, this is an agenda item where there's more than 2 commissioners that are attending and other entities that are attending, because we have commissioners from other jurisdictions. So
I don't know if that falls in line with the spirit of what we passed, because it's not a Spokane County Commissioner initiated meeting. That was the point of that resolution, was that if it was an official Spokane County led meeting. So I mean, I guess this is kind of gray on that, because you do have to chair it as commissioner, but it's actually led by Kathleen Torella, and her department is more how I view that meeting. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think this is a Spokane County Commissioner called and led meeting, is it?
we are just trying to make sure we're meeting the intent and the way the resolution is stated. So that was why Kathleen wanted to bring it to me ahead of time to make sure that the commissioners approved it, because that was how she was reading the resolution.
Okay, well, then I'll look forward to seeing the agenda.
Very good. So we'll bring that up tomorrow afternoon. Any other miscellaneous items?
I don't have anything, Commissioner.
Okay. So Mark, I may have you help me as we have 3 different items for executive sessions. So can I do it all as one group, or do we need to come in and out after each, or just document the length of each as we end?
I think we're fine if we just document, because it does make a little ridiculous to come all the way back in an open session, come back into a closed session, which is really just clicking on 2 different buttons on our computers. So I think if we can just note that, that'd be fine. For the pending litigation with me, Dale Anderson should also be a part of that. He's one of our deputy prosecutors, so please bring him along.
Okay. And I think he was in. Okay, so Dale Anderson. Okay, so we have 3 executive sessions that we'll be going into. The first one is for labor negotiations with Ashley Cameron and Josh Brogue. It'll have our executive management team, the 3 county commissioners, Mark McLean, our civil attorney. Anyone else that will be joining in that one? Okay, and it's anticipated, it looks like 25 minutes. Is that correct, Ashley? So 25 minutes. The next one is with Ashley Cameron on review of performance of a public employee. You have that for 15 minutes. And that would just include the 3 commissioners, Ashley, our executive management team, and Mark McLean, our civil attorney. Okay, and then the third one is pending and potential litigation, which is for 10 minutes, which is will be our 3 commissioners, Mark McLean, our executive management team, and Dale Anderson from the civil attorney's office. Is that correct?
That's correct. Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, so then we have so it looks like 50 minutes total is what we anticipate for those 3 actions to occur. I think since we have Josh on, that we'll start with the first one, which is Ashley and Josh Brogue on labor negotiations, and it is 10:54. It's probably going to take us a couple minutes to get in, so I'm going to have us starting at 10. We'll say 56.
Adjourning afterwards.
And then we will adjourn after this meeting for the day. So, and if there's any extension, we will let the clerk of the board know, so that way she can document what time the executive session finishes. Thank you all. We will see you in executive session.